The emergency room cameras caught everything. A world-renowned surgeon's fist tangled in a nurse's scrubs, her body yanked forward like a rag doll. 20 witnesses. Not one person moved. But what froze everyone wasn't the violence, it was what came after. The small blonde nurse didn't scream, didn't cry. Her face went blank in a way that made hardened ER staff uncomfortable. Then she turned back to the dying woman on the gurney and said 3 words that would unravel everything. Save her first. Nobody knew that Emily Shaw had survived worse than Dr. Marcus Holloway could ever imagine. And somewhere in the observation deck, a man in a dark jacket was already forwarding that footage to people who would burn the entire hospital to the ground. Before we go further, this story gets darker before it gets better. If you're watching, drop a comment with your city. I want to see how far this story travels. Hit subscribe if you believe the truth always finds a way out. Now let's go back to where it started. The fluorescent lights in Brighton Falls Medical Center's emergency department never stopped humming. Emily Shaw had worked there for 11 months, and in that time she'd learned that the hum was actually comforting, predictable. It meant the power was on, the monitors were working, and people who came through those sliding glass doors had a chance. What wasn't predictable was Dr. Marcus Holloway. He swept into the trauma bay at 11:47 p.m. on a Tuesday in late September, trailing residents like ducklings and radiating the kind of authority that made people step aside without thinking. Holloway was 52, silver-haired, and had a surgical reputation that stretched from Brighton Falls all the way to Johns Hopkins. He'd published 17 papers, performed over 3,000 cardiac procedures, had a wing of the hospital named after his family's donations. Emily was replacing an IV line when he arrived. She didn't look up. "Where's the talk screen on bed 3? Holloway's voice carried across the department. "Lab's running it now," Emily said. Her hand stayed steady on the catheter. "I asked for it 20 minutes ago. They're backed up." "Then call them again." Emily finished securing the line, checked the drip rate, and finally met his eyes. "I called twice. They said 10 more minutes." Something flickered across Holloway's face. Not quite anger. More like a reflex. The muscle memory of someone who'd never been contradicted without consequences. "When I give you an order," he said slowly, "I expect immediate action, not excuses." The 2 residents behind him shifted uncomfortably. One of them, a kid named Davis who couldn't have been more than 26, stared at his shoes. Emily nodded once. "Understood." She walked back to the nurse's station. Her hands didn't shake. They never did anymore. Holloway watched her go, then turned to his residents. "That's the problem with civilian staff. No discipline." Emily heard him. Everyone heard him. The charge nurse, Rita, shot her a look that said, "Let it go." Emily was already letting it go. She'd been letting things go for 11 months. The thing about working under Marcus Holloway was that he made sure you understood the hierarchy. Surgeons at the top, residents below them, nurses at the bottom. And among the nurses, Emily somehow occupied an even lower rung, maybe because she was quiet, maybe because she never pushed back, or maybe because Holloway had simply decided she was an acceptable target. It had started small. Ignored questions, dismissed suggestions. Then came the comments about her competence, delivered just loud enough for others to hear. Then outright insults. By month 6, he was snapping his fingers at her like she was a dog. She took it all without a word. Rita once asked her why she didn't report him. Emily had just smiled and said she needed the job. Which was true, but not the whole truth. The whole truth was that Emily Shaw had survived things that would have broken most people, and a surgeon with a God complex barely registered as a threat. The shift dragged on. A car accident victim. A kid with a broken arm. An elderly man with chest pain who turned out to be having a heart attack. Emily moved through it all with the kind of efficiency that came from experience, the type of experience that didn't fit neatly on a nursing resume. At 2:15 a.m., a mother rushed through the doors carrying a small boy. "Please," the woman gasped. "He fell. He can't move his arm." Emily was there in seconds. She took the boy, maybe 7 years old, tears streaming down his face, and guided them to an exam room. "What's your name, buddy?" "Caleb." The word came out as a sob. "Okay, Caleb, I'm Emily. We're going to figure out what's going on, all right?" The initial exam revealed a probable fracture, but there was swelling that concerned her. Nerve damage was possible. She called for imaging and started an IV for pain management, talking to Caleb the whole time about his favorite video games. Holloway appeared in the doorway. "What's the holdup? I've got a cardiac case coming in." "This boy needs x-rays," Emily said. "Possible compartment syndrome." "Then send him to imaging and clear the room." "I'm waiting for the radiologist to confirm." "I don't care what you're waiting for. Move him. Now." Emily looked at Caleb's mother, who'd gone pale, then back at Holloway. "He's in pain. I need 5 more minutes to stabilize. Are you deaf or just incompetent?" The room went quiet. Even Caleb stopped crying. Emily's jaw tightened. "I'll move him as soon as—" "You'll move him when I tell you to move him." Holloway stepped closer. "Or maybe you'd prefer to find another hospital where they tolerate insubordination." She held his gaze for 3 seconds. Then she turned back to Caleb and finished adjusting his IV. "Transport's coming," she told his mother softly. "They'll take good care of him." Holloway stormed out. Rita appeared the moment he was gone. "Emily, you can't—" "I know," Emily said. She wasn't angry, just tired. 20 minutes later, the cardiac case arrived. 58-year-old woman, massive MI, already coding in the ambulance. The paramedics wheeled her in at a run, chest compressions ongoing, and the trauma bay exploded into controlled chaos. "Epi!" Holloway barked. Emily was already drawing it up. "Defib pads!" She had them ready. "Where's the crash cart?" "Right here." Her voice cut through the noise, calm and clear. They worked for 16 minutes. Chest compressions. Intubation. Medication after medication pumped into veins that were barely responding. The woman's heart rhythm jumped and flatlined and jumped again. "Come on," Holloway muttered. "Come on, damn it." Emily was running the second IV line when she saw the problem. "She's bleeding." "What?" "Internal bleeding. Look at her abdomen." Holloway's eyes snapped to the swelling. "Christ, we need to crack her chest." "Here? We don't have time to move her." He looked around wildly. "Someone get me a thoracotomy tray, now." The room erupted. Residents scrambling, nurses pulling equipment. Emily moved without thinking, anticipating needs before they were voiced, hands steady as she passed instruments. They opened the woman's chest right there in the trauma bay. Blood everywhere. Holloway's hands inside her ribcage, squeezing her heart manually. "Clamp," he said. Emily placed it in his palm. Suction. She was already there. For 9 minutes, they kept that woman alive through sheer force of will. And then, like a miracle, her heart started beating on its own. "We got her," someone whispered. "Cath lab," Holloway ordered. "Right now. Move." The team mobilized. Within 90 seconds, they had the patient on the way upstairs. And the trauma bay looked like a war zone. Blood on the floor, instruments scattered, the smell of opened flesh and fear. Emily was disposing of sharps when Holloway grabbed her. His hand closed around her upper arm and yanked her backward. She stumbled, hit the edge of a supply cart. "What the hell were you doing?" His face was inches from hers. "I called for clamps twice. Twice!" "I was already—" "You were too slow. You could have killed that patient." Emily's training kicked in before her brain caught up. Her body went still, completely still. The kind of stillness that in another life, in another place, had kept her alive when moving meant dying. "Look at me when I'm talking to you." She looked, her face blank. "You think because you work here 11 months that makes you competent? You're a nurse. You follow orders. You don't think. You don't hesitate. And you sure as hell don't question me." The entire ER was watching now. Residents frozen. Nurses staring, a patient's family member peeking around the corner. Holloway's hand was still on her arm, gripping hard enough to leave marks. "Do you understand me?" Emily's voice came out flat. "Yes?" "Yes, what?" "Yes, doctor." He let go, shoved her slightly as he did. Then he turned to the residents. "Clean this up. I'll be upstairs." He walked out. The glass doors slid shut behind him. Nobody moved. Emily stood there for 5 seconds. Then she picked up the contaminated instruments and carried them to the disposal bin. Her hands didn't shake. Her breathing didn't change. She moved like she was underwater, every action deliberate and slow. Rita started to approach, but Emily shook her head once. She finished cleaning, restocked the cart, checked on her other patients. At 4:30 a.m., during her break, she locked herself in the staff bathroom and sat on the closed toilet lid. 4 minutes. She gave herself 4 minutes. Then she washed her face, fixed her ponytail, and went back to work. The cardiac patient survived surgery. Caleb's x-rays showed a clean fracture with no nerve damage. The rest of the shift passed without incident. Emily clocked out at 7:02 a.m. She walked to her car in the parking garage, drove home to her studio apartment, and slept for 6 hours without dreaming. When she woke up, there were 3 missed calls from the hospital. She called back, got transferred twice, finally reached someone in hospital administration. "Miss Shaw, we need you to come in for a meeting." "What kind of meeting?" "It's regarding an incident that occurred during your shift. Can you be here at 3?" Emily looked at the clock. 1:47 p.m. "I'll be there." The administrative offices were on the 3rd floor, in a wing that smelled like expensive carpet and air freshener. Emily had never been up here before. A receptionist led her to a conference room where 3 people waited: Linda Cortez, director of nursing; Michael Brennan, hospital attorney; and someone Emily didn't recognize, a thin man in an expensive suit with cold eyes. "Miss Shaw, please sit." She sat. Linda folded her hands on the table. "We're conducting an investigation into allegations of workplace misconduct." "Allegations against who?" "Against you." Emily blinked. "Me?" Dr. Holloway filed a formal complaint this morning. He states that during a critical cardiac emergency, you failed to follow direct orders, demonstrated insubordination, and created a hostile work environment. The words didn't make sense at first. Emily replayed the night in her head. The grab, the shove, the public humiliation. "He grabbed me," she said quietly. The attorney, Brennan, leaned forward. "According to Dr. Holloway, he briefly redirected you to prevent further delays during a life-threatening emergency. Multiple witnesses confirmed the patient's life was in jeopardy. Multiple witnesses also saw him assault me. That's a very serious accusation." "It's what happened." The thin man in the suit finally spoke. His voice was smooth. "Miss Shaw, Brighton Falls Medical Center takes all complaints seriously. However, we must also consider Dr. Holloway's 30-year service record and his reputation. I don't care about his reputation, which includes countless lives saved and millions in funding secured for this facility. We've reviewed security footage from last night. What we see is a high-stress emergency situation where tempers flared." Emily felt something cold settle in her chest. "You're protecting him." "We're being thorough," Linda said. She actually looked uncomfortable. "Emily, I know this is difficult, but we have to think about what's best for the hospital." "What about what's best for the staff?" The thin man slid a folder across the table. "We'd like to offer you a severance package, 6 months' salary, full benefits continuation, and a strong letter of recommendation." Emily opened the folder. The numbers were generous, almost suspiciously generous. "All you have to do is sign a non-disclosure agreement," Brennan added. "No discussing the incident publicly, no social media, no lawsuits." "You want me to leave?" "We want to resolve this amicably." Emily looked at the 3 of them. Linda wouldn't meet her eyes. The attorney looked bored. The thin man watched her like she was a problem to be solved. She closed the folder. "No." "Miss Shaw, I'm not signing anything. I didn't do anything wrong. He assaulted me in front of 20 people." The thin man's expression didn't change. "Then, as of this moment, you're suspended pending the investigation's conclusion. You'll need to surrender your badge and any hospital property." "How long is the investigation?" "As long as it takes." Emily stood. She pulled her ID badge from her pocket and placed it on the table. "I want everything in writing." "Of course." She walked out. Made it all the way to her car before the anger hit. Not hot rage. Cold fury. The type that settled in your bones and waited. She sat in the driver's seat for 10 minutes. Then she drove home. The suspension dragged on. 1 week, 2 weeks. Emily called repeatedly. Got transferred to voicemail, sent emails, received automated responses. On day 16, an attorney showed up at her door. His name was Richard Voss, and he worked for the hospital's insurance company. He had a new offer: 12 months salary, benefits for a year. Glowing recommendations. "Why are you trying so hard to make me go away?" Emily asked. Voss smiled. It didn't reach his eyes. "We're trying to be fair. You're trying to bury this." We're trying to avoid litigation that would hurt everyone involved. Think about it, Miss Shaw. You're 31 years old, no family in Brighton Falls. This could follow you for years, or you could take the settlement, move somewhere fresh, start over. I don't want to start over. I want my job back. That's not going to happen. Something in his tone made it final. Emily realized with sudden clarity that they'd already decided. Holloway would stay, she would go. The only question was how much it would cost them. I need time to think, she said. You have 48 hours. He left. Emily sat on her couch in the dark apartment and thought about the past 11 months. The insults, the belittling, the way Holloway had made her feel small and powerless. And then that night, his hand on her arm, his face in hers, the absolute certainty that he could do whatever he wanted without consequences. They were asking her to accept that reality, to take the money and disappear. She thought about calling someone, but there was no one to call. Her mother had died 3 years ago. She had no siblings, no close friends in Brighton Falls. The few people she'd kept in touch with from before, from the time she didn't talk about, were scattered across the country. She was alone. And maybe that was the point. Maybe that's why Holloway had chosen her in the first place. On the morning of day 18, Emily's phone rang. Unknown number. Hello? Emily Shaw? Yes. My name is Catherine Pierce. I'm a reporter with the Brighton Falls Observer. I'd like to talk to you about Dr. Marcus Holloway. Emily's breath caught. How did you get this number? I have a source inside Brighton Falls Medical. They sent me footage from the night of September 23rd. I've watched it 14 times. I've also found 3 other nurses willing to talk about Holloway's behavior. All off the record. All terrified. Why are you calling me? Because what he did to you was captured on camera. And I think you're the one brave enough to go on record. Emily closed her eyes. I can't. Why not? Because I need to work in this city. Because they'll bury me if I fight. They're already burying you. Catherine's voice was gentle but firm. Emily, I've been investigating this hospital for 6 months. There are patterns, complaints that disappeared, staff who left suddenly. I think Holloway's been doing this for years, and I think the administration knows. Then why hasn't anyone stopped him? Because people like him don't get stopped until someone makes them impossible to ignore. Emily sat down. What do you want from me? An interview. On camera. Tell me what happened that night. Tell me what working under him was like. Give me something I can use. And if I say no, then I write the story anyway, but it won't have the same impact, and he'll keep doing this to the next nurse who can't fight back. Emily thought about Caleb's mother, about Rita's worried looks, about all the times she'd watched someone get torn apart and told herself it wasn't her problem. I need to think about it, she said. You have my number. Catherine hung up. Emily sat there holding her phone, feeling like she was standing at the edge of a cliff. Jump or don't jump? Fight or disappear? Be the person she used to be or keep pretending that version of herself never existed? She was still sitting there when her phone buzzed again. Text message from an unknown number. Check the news. She pulled up the Brighton Falls Observer website. The headline made her stomach drop. Breaking. Mass casualty event on Highway 94, military convoy collision. Multiple fatalities. The article was sparse on details. A convoy of military vehicles had been traveling through Brighton Falls when a semi-truck crossed the median. 6 vehicles involved. Casualties unknown. First responders on scene. Emily's old instincts kicked in immediately. She knew what that meant. Trauma. Lots of it. And Brighton Falls Medical Center was the only Level 1 trauma center within 50 miles. They'd need everyone. She grabbed her keys. The hospital parking lot was chaos. News vans, military vehicles, families clustered near the entrance. Emily bypassed the main doors and went through the emergency entrance she'd used 100 times. The moment she stepped inside, she knew it was bad. Blood on the floor, someone screaming, the PA system calling codes. Every trauma bay occupied. Rita saw her first. Emily, you can't be here. You're suspended. Where do you need me? I said you can't. Rita, where? Rita looked at her for 2 seconds. Then she pointed. Trauma 3. Soldier with a collapsed lung. Residents are overwhelmed. Emily moved. Trauma 3 was a nightmare. A kid, maybe 22, with a sucking chest wound and a face full of terror. Two residents were trying to place a chest tube, but their hands were shaking and the patient was crashing. Emily stepped in. "Move!" "Who are you?" one resident stammered. "Someone who's done this before. Move." They moved. Emily's hands found the anatomy like muscle memory, landmarks, intercostal space. She worked fast and clean, and when she slid the tube home, air rushed out with a sound like a punctured tire. The kid gasped. Color returned to his face. "Secure it," Emily told the residents, "then get him upstairs." She was already moving to the next bay. For 3 hours, Emily Shaw worked like she'd never left the military. She ran trauma assessments, placed lines, stabilized spines, performed procedures that most civilian nurses had only read about. She moved with an economy of motion that came from doing this under fire, literally, in places where the electricity cut out and the mortars fell close enough to shake dust from the ceiling. She didn't think, she just worked. At some point, Holloway appeared. "What the hell is she doing here?" "Saving lives," Rita shot back. "You want to argue about it now or after we get through this?" Holloway's face went red, but he couldn't argue. They needed her. By 6 p.m., the worst was over. 13 soldiers stabilized, 8 in surgery, 2 airlifted to specialized facilities. 5 walked out with minor injuries. 0 died. Emily was cleaning up Trauma 3 when she heard the boots. Military boots. Distinctive sound on hospital tile. She turned. A man in army dress uniform stood in the doorway. Full colonel. Chest covered in ribbons. He was flanked by 2 MPs, and he was staring directly at her. The entire ER fell silent. The colonel took 3 steps forward. Then he stopped. His face registered something Emily couldn't quite read. Shock, maybe, or recognition. "Staff Sergeant Shaw?" Every head in the emergency department turned toward Emily. She froze. The colonel's voice carried across the entire space. "Is that you, Shaw?" Emily's mouth opened, closed. Her mind was racing, trying to figure out how this was happening, how he was here, how anyone from that part of her life had found her in this place. "Sir," she finally managed. The colonel shook his head slowly, like he couldn't believe what he was seeing. "I'll be damned." Holloway stepped forward. "Excuse me, Colonel, but there's been some confusion. This woman is suspended from, This woman," the colonel interrupted, his voice sharp as a blade, "is a decorated combat medic who saved 37 lives under fire during 18 months in Kandahar. She ran an entire aid station for 3 months after her supervising officers were killed in an ambush. She has 2 bronze stars and a Purple Heart." The silence in the ER was absolute. The colonel looked around at all the stunned faces. Holloway had gone white. Rita's mouth was hanging open. The residents looked like they'd been struck by lightning. Then the colonel looked back at Emily. "Why the hell are you working as a civilian nurse?" Emily's voice came out quiet. "I needed a change, sir. A change." He shook his head again. Then he noticed something, the absence of her badge, the way the staff was looking at her. "Wait. Shaw, are you telling me you're not currently on duty?" Before Emily could answer, a man appeared at the entrance to the ER. He was wearing a dark coat, carrying a briefcase. And behind him were 2 people in suits with federal badges visible on their belts. The man smiled. It was the kind of smile that meant someone's world was about to end. "Dr. Holloway," the man said, "my name is Special Agent Robert Daines. We need to talk about some irregularities in your medical records, and some complaints that have been systematically buried for the past 8 years. Holloway's face drained of all remaining color. Daines looked at Emily. "Miss Shaw, you might want to stick around for this." Emily didn't move. She stood there in her blood-stained scrubs, surrounded by soldiers she'd just saved and staff who'd watched her do it, while the walls she'd spent 11 months building came down in real time. Holloway found his voice first. "I don't know what you think you're investigating, but we're investigating you." Daines opened his briefcase and pulled out a tablet. "Specifically, we're looking into 23 formal complaints filed against you over the past 8 years, complaints that were sealed, buried, or resulted in NDAs and cash settlements paid by this hospital's insurance carrier." The ER had gone from silent to airless. Even the machines seemed quieter. Holloway's attorney voice kicked in. Any settlements were handled appropriately through legal channels. Legal channels that included intimidation, threats to medical licenses, and a pattern of behavior that crosses into criminal territory. Danes tapped the tablet. We've been building this case for 7 months, and 3 days ago we received security footage from September 23rd that made it impossible to wait any longer. Emily's stomach dropped. The footage. Someone had sent the footage to federal investigators. Danes looked at her. Miss Shaw, when you have a moment, I'd like to take your statement, along with permission to use that video as evidence. She's not saying anything without representation, Rita said suddenly. She stepped next to Emily like a shield. And she's not suspended anymore. I'm reinstating her right now. You can't do that, Holloway snapped. Administration already? Administration can deal with me later. Rita's voice had an edge Emily had never heard before. This woman just saved 13 lives while suspended. I'd like to see them argue she doesn't belong here. The colonel was watching this exchange with interest. Shaw, you need a lawyer? I don't know yet, sir. Well, when you figure it out, call me. He pulled a card from his pocket and handed it to her. And for the record, if this hospital gives you any more trouble, you let me know. We take care of our own. He left with his MPS, boots echoing down the hallway. Danes was still waiting. Miss Shaw? Emily looked at the tablet in his hands. She thought about the footage. Holloway grabbing her, shoving her, that moment when her body had gone still because stillness was survival. She thought about sitting in her apartment for 18 days, wondering if fighting back would destroy what was left of her life. I'll give you a statement, she said. But I want to know everything you have first. Danes smiled slightly. That's fair. Conference room in 20 minutes? Emily nodded. The federal agent and his team disappeared into the administrative wing. The ER slowly returned to function, but the atmosphere had changed. People kept glancing at Emily, whispering. She caught fragments, combat medic, bronze stars, 18 months under fire. Holloway stood frozen in the middle of the trauma bay. His face had gone from white to gray. When he finally moved, it was toward Emily. You need to understand something, he said quietly. His voice shook. Whatever they think they have, it's taken out of context. I've dedicated my life to this hospital. Get away from her. Rita stepped between them. Right now, Marcus, I'm not joking. I'm talking to... You're not talking to anyone. You're going to your office and you're staying there until security tells you otherwise. Something in Holloway's expression cracked. For a second, Emily saw real fear. Then his surgeon's mask slammed back into place. This is a witch hunt. When it's over, everyone involved will regret it. He walked out, but his hands were shaking. Rita turned to Emily. You okay? I don't know. That's honest. Rita squeezed her shoulder. Go talk to the feds. I'll handle things here. Emily washed the blood off her hands and arms in the staff bathroom, stared at herself in the mirror. Her blonde hair was falling out of its ponytail, dark circles under her eyes. She looked tired. She looked like someone who'd been surviving instead of living. The reflection stared back without answers. 20 minutes later, she sat in a conference room across from Special Agent Danes and a woman who introduced herself as Assistant U.S. Attorney Michelle Ramos. Before we start, Ramos said, you should know that nothing you say here obligates you to anything. This is voluntary. But you want me to testify? Eventually, yes, but let's start with what happened, Emily told them. She started with her first week at Brighton Falls Medical Center when Holloway had looked at her personnel file and made a comment about how she must have needed the job badly to take such a pay cut from her previous position. She described the escalation, how he'd gone from dismissive to cruel, how he'd made examples of her in front of staff, how she'd learned to keep her head down and her mouth shut. She told them about September 23rd, the boy with the broken arm, the cardiac emergency, Holloway's hand on her arm, yanking her backward, the way everyone had watched and done nothing. Why didn't you fight back? Danes asked. Not accusing, just curious. Because fighting back in that moment would have endangered a patient, and because... Emily paused. Because I learned a long time ago that some situations you survive by going still. Ramos nodded slowly. Your military service. Yeah. Can you tell us about that? Emily hadn't talked about Kandahar in 3 years. She'd buried it under nursing shifts in quiet apartments and the deliberate choice to be someone different. But sitting in that conference room, she found the words coming easier than expected. She told them about enlisting at 19, about becoming a combat medic because she wanted to help people and couldn't afford medical school, about her deployment to Afghanistan, where she'd spent 18 months patching soldiers back together under conditions that would have broken most doctors. She told them about the ambush that killed her supervising physicians and left her in charge of an aid station at 28 years old, about the 3 months she'd run that station alone, performing procedures she barely knew how to do, keeping men alive through sheer determination and borrowed knowledge. "I got good at staying calm," she said. "When mortars hit close enough to shake the building, you can't afford to panic. You just keep working." "Is that why you became a nurse after you got out?" "Part of it. The other part is that I was tired of war. I wanted to save lives without people shooting at me." Danes pulled up the security footage on his tablet. "I need to warn you, this is difficult to watch." "I was there. I know what's on it." He turned the screen toward her anyway. The video was grainy but clear enough. Timestamp 2:37 a.m., the trauma bay from an overhead angle. Emily's back to the camera as she cleaned up after the cardiac save. Then Holloway entering frame, grabbing her arm, yanking her around. Her stumbling into the supply cart, his face inches from hers, shouting words the camera didn't quite catch. But what made Emily's chest tight was watching herself go still. Seeing that moment from the outside, how her body had simply shut down, how her face had gone blank, how she'd looked like someone trying to disappear inside their own skin. "Who sent you this?" she asked. "We can't reveal that, but it came from someone inside the hospital who'd been documenting Holloway's behavior for months." "Why didn't they come forward sooner?" "Fear. Same reason you didn't report him." Ramos leaned forward. "Emily, we've spoken to 6 other women who worked under Holloway. All of them have similar stories: verbal abuse, physical intimidation. One was shoved against a wall. Another had medical instruments thrown at her. Why didn't they speak up?" "They tried, and the hospital paid them to be quiet." Emily absorbed that. "How much?" Settlements ranged from $50,000 to $200,000, all with NDAs, all with implied threats that speaking out would destroy their careers. "And now you want me to be the one who breaks the pattern. You're the one with video evidence. You're the one who refused the settlement. And frankly, you're the one with the credibility to make this stick." Danes closed the tablet. A decorated combat veteran speaking out against a powerful surgeon? That plays very differently than a nurse who took hush money. Emily felt sick. "So I'm useful. You're essential." Ramos's voice was firm. "But only if you're willing. We won't force you." "What happens if I say no?" "We build the case without you. It'll be harder, but we have other evidence. Financial records showing systematic payouts, emails discussing how to handle complaints. We might still get him." Might. Emily stood and walked to the window. Outside, the parking lot was still full of military vehicles. She could see soldiers smoking cigarettes, talking quietly. Some of them were probably the ones she'd treated, the ones who were alive because she'd shown up despite being suspended. She thought about this boy Caleb and his terrified mother, about Rita's worried looks over 11 months, about 6 other women who'd been hurt and paid off and told to disappear. She thought about what the colonel had said. "We take care of our own." "What do you need from me?" she asked without turning around. Behind her, she heard Ramos exhale. "A formal statement, testimony when we bring charges, and your consent to use the video." "Will I have to face him in court?" "Yes." Emily turned back. "Then let's do it." They spent the next 2 hours going through everything in detail. Times, dates, specific incidents. Ramos recorded it all, occasionally stopping to ask clarifying questions. By the time they finished, Emily felt wrung out. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now we execute search warrants. We seize records, interview staff, and build an airtight case." Dane stood. "In the meantime, you should probably get a lawyer. Not because you need one, but because things are going to get ugly." "How ugly?" "Holloway has money and connections. He'll fight. And when powerful people fight, they throw everything at the wall to see what sticks." Emily left the conference room just after 9 p.m. The ER had calmed down. Most of the military casualties were either in surgery or stabilized in the ICU. Rita found her near the nurses' station. "You look like hell," Rita said. "I feel like hell." "Good. That means you're processing." Rita handed her a protein bar. "Eat something, then go home." "I'm still suspended." Not anymore. I talked to Linda Cortez. You're reinstated effective immediately with back pay. They're too scared of the federal investigation to argue. Emily unwrapped the protein bar mechanically. Rita, did you know about the other complaints? Rita's face tightened. I knew something was wrong, but I didn't know the extent. I should have pushed harder. You couldn't have changed anything. Maybe not, but I could have made it clear you weren't alone. She paused. A bunch of us are meeting tomorrow morning. Nurses, techs, even a few residents. We're drafting a letter supporting you, demanding accountability. You don't have to do that. Yes, we do. Because if we don't stand up now, we never will. Emily felt something crack in her chest. Not breaking. Thawing. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. This is going to get worse before it gets better. Rita was right. The next morning, Emily woke to 17 missed calls and 43 text messages. Her phone had been blowing up since 6 a.m. She scrolled through the messages, heart sinking with each one. Most were supportive. Coworkers saying they believed her. Friends from her military days asking if she needed anything. But mixed in were the other kind. You're ruining a good man's career, gold digger trying to cash in. Maybe if you'd done your job right, he wouldn't have had to correct you. The news had leaked. Someone, probably Holloway's attorney, had gone to the press with their own version of events. The Brighton Falls Observer website had a new article. Suspended nurse accuses renowned surgeon of assault. Hospital under federal investigation. The article was careful, used words like alleged and under investigation, but the comments section was vicious. People defended Holloway, attacked Emily, dissected her military service and wondered if she had PTSD, suggested she was unstable. Emily put her phone down and made coffee with shaking hands. She was halfway through her second cup when someone knocked on her apartment door. She looked through the peephole. Catherine Pierce, the reporter who'd called her days ago. Emily opened the door. How did you find my address? Public records. Can I come in? Why? Because that article in the Observer this morning is garbage, and I want to tell the real story. Emily should have said no, should have closed the door and called the federal investigators. Instead, she stepped aside. Catherine came in with a recording device and a notepad. She was younger than Emily expected, maybe 35, with sharp eyes and the look of someone who'd learned not to trust easy answers. I've been tracking Holloway for 8 months, Catherine said without preamble. Started when a friend of mine took a settlement and left nursing entirely. She wouldn't tell me details, but I knew something was wrong. And now you want my story. I want the truth. On record. With your face and your name attached. Emily sat down on her couch. If I do this, it becomes permanent. I can't take it back. No, you can't. Holloway will come after me. He's already coming after you. The difference is whether you control the narrative or he does. Emily thought about the comments section. The people calling her a liar. The suggestion that she was too damaged from war to be reliable. She thought about 6 other women who'd been silenced with money and threats. What do you need to know? She asked. Catherine's interview was different from the federal investigation. She didn't just want facts. She wanted context. She asked about Emily's childhood, her reasons for enlisting, what it had been like coming home from war. She asked about the first time Holloway had belittled her and how it had escalated over months. Why didn't you quit? Catherine asked. Because I needed the job. Because I thought I could handle it. Because... Emily paused. Because part of me thought I deserved it. Why would you think that? I don't know. Maybe because I'd failed to save everyone in Kandahar. Maybe because I felt like I should be tougher. Or maybe because when you get treated like you're worthless long enough, you start to believe it. Catherine stopped writing. That's going in the article. I know. They talked for 90 minutes. When Catherine finally packed up her equipment, she looked at Emily with something like respect. This is going to blow up. You ready for that? No, but I'm doing it anyway. Good. Catherine paused at the door. For what it's worth, I think you're brave. Emily didn't feel brave. She felt terrified. The article ran 2 days later. Front page of the Observer. Combat veteran nurse breaks silence. He made me feel worthless. Catherine had written it carefully. She included Emily's military service, her credentials, the timeline of Holloway's abuse. She quoted the federal investigation. and she'd gotten 3 other former nurses, anonymous but corroborated, to confirm similar patterns. The article exploded. It got picked up by state media. Then national. By noon, Emily's phone was ringing nonstop. News stations wanting interviews, advocacy groups offering support, and mixed in the hate mail. People calling her a traitor, a liar, someone trying to destroy a great man. Emily turned her phone off. She went to work that afternoon because staying home felt like hiding. The ER staff rallied around her. Rita made sure she wasn't left alone. Other nurses shared their own stories, not about Holloway specifically, but about the small indignities they'd endured, the times they'd been ignored or dismissed or made to feel less than. "You're giving us permission to speak up," one nurse told her. "That matters." But not everyone was supportive. 2 residents refused to work with her. One attending muttered something about attention-seeking. And when Emily passed the surgical wing, she saw Holloway through a window. He was on the phone, pacing, his face red with anger. Their eyes met for a second. Then he turned his back. 3 days after the article ran, the hospital held an emergency board meeting. Emily wasn't invited, but Rita was. As the ER's senior charge nurse, she had a voice in staffing decisions. She called Emily afterward. "They're putting Holloway on administrative leave." Emily gripped her phone. "They are?" "Federal pressure. Too many eyes on them. They can't be seen protecting him anymore." "What about me?" "You're staying. Full reinstatement. They're even offering to cover therapy costs if you want it." "That's generous of them." Rita heard the sarcasm. "Emily, I know they're only doing this because they're scared, but take the win anyway." That night, Emily couldn't sleep. She lay in bed staring at the ceiling, replaying the past month. The grab, the suspension, the convoy crash, the moment everything had unraveled. She kept thinking about Holloway's face when the federal agents arrived. The fear in his eyes, the way his hands had shaken. She didn't feel satisfaction, just tired. Her phone buzzed at 2 a.m. Text from an unknown number. "You're going to regret this." Emily stared at the message. Then she screenshot it and forwarded it to Agent Danes. His response came back within minutes. "Got it. We're tracking all communications related to the case. You safe?" "For now. Stay vigilant. People like Holloway don't go down quietly." Emily turned her phone off and finally fell asleep around 4 a.m. She dreamed about Kandahar, about the night the ambush happened, about trying to save a soldier who was bleeding out faster than she could work, his eyes locked on hers as the life drained away. She woke up gasping. The next week was a blur. Federal agents executed search warrants across Brighton Falls Medical Center. They seized computers, files, emails. Staff members were called in for interviews. The hospital's legal team went into overdrive. And then the real bombshell dropped. Danes called Emily on a Tuesday afternoon. "We found something. Can you come to our field office?" She drove there in a daze. The federal building was downtown, all concrete and security checkpoints. Danes met her in a conference room where stacks of documents covered every surface. "What is this?" Emily asked. "Evidence of systematic corruption." He handed her a folder. "We've been going through the hospital's financial records, the NDAs, the settlements, and we found a pattern." Emily opened the folder. Inside were copies of agreements, legal documents, payment records. She recognized one name immediately, Jennifer Mills, a nurse who'd left Brighton Falls 6 months before Emily arrived. 23 women over 8 years, Dane said. "But it's worse than we thought. The hospital wasn't just paying them off. They were actively concealing complaints from medical boards, falsifying incident reports, and in some cases threatening women's professional licenses if they spoke out." "That's conspiracy. That's racketeering." Ramos appeared in the doorway. "We're not just charging Holloway anymore. We're going after the administration. Linda Cortez, the legal team, even the CFO. They all knew. They all helped cover it up." Emily felt dizzy. "How high does this go?" "Hospital board, maybe higher. We're still unraveling it." "Why? Why protect him?" "Money." Holloway brought in grants, donations, prestige. His cardiac program generated millions annually. They decided his value outweighed the harm he caused. Emily thought about sitting in that conference room weeks ago. Linda Cortez avoiding her eyes. The attorney looking bored. The thin man in the expensive suit telling her to take the settlement and disappear. They'd done it before. 23 times before. What happens now? Emily asked. Now we indict. Ramos sat down across from her. Multiple charges: assault, harassment, conspiracy to obstruct justice. And we're going to need you to testify to all of it. When? Grand jury convenes in 2 weeks. Trial probably won't start for 6 months. But Emily, Ramos paused. This is going to be brutal. Holloway's defense team will attack your credibility. They'll bring up your military service, suggest PTSD, question your memory. They'll try to paint you as unstable. Let them try. I need you to understand what you're walking into. I understand. Emily met her eyes. I survived 18 months in a war zone. I can survive a courtroom. But that night, alone in her apartment, Emily wasn't so sure. She poured a glass of wine and sat by the window, watching Brighton Falls' lights flicker in the darkness. She thought about all the women who'd come before her, the ones who'd taken the money and left. Could she blame them? They'd been offered a way out, a way to stop hurting. She'd refused because something in her couldn't accept that outcome, couldn't accept that Holloway got to keep destroying people. But now, facing months of legal battles and public scrutiny, part of her wondered if she'd made the right choice. Her phone rang. Rita. Turn on Channel 7. Emily grabbed the remote. The local news was showing footage of federal agents leaving Brighton Falls Medical Center with boxes of evidence. The chyron read, multiple hospital officials named in federal indictment. The reporter's voice was grave. Sources confirmed that Dr. Marcus Holloway, along with 3 hospital administrators, will face charges related to a pattern of workplace abuse and systematic cover-up spanning nearly a decade. The case centers on allegations brought forward by Emily Shaw, a military veteran and registered nurse who refused a settlement offer and instead cooperated with federal investigators. They showed her picture, her face on television, attached to the biggest scandal in Brighton Falls history. Emily's hands went cold. You still there? Rita asked. Yeah. This is what justice looks like, messy and public and scary. I know. You need anything? No, I'm okay. She wasn't okay, but she was still standing. The indictments came down 3 days later. Marcus Holloway, Linda Cortez, Michael Brennan, the hospital's CFO, all charged with multiple felonies. The news went national. CNN picked it up. So did the New York Times. Emily stopped reading articles about herself, stopped checking social media. She went to work, treated patients, and tried to pretend the world wasn't watching. But it was watching, and Holloway was watching too. On the 5th night after the indictments, Emily came home to find her apartment door slightly open. She froze in the hallway. Her military training kicked in immediately. She pulled her phone out, finger hovering over 911, and pushed the door open with her foot. The apartment had been tossed, drawers pulled out, papers scattered, her laptop missing from the kitchen counter. Nothing else taken. No TV, no jewelry, just the laptop. Emily backed out and called the police. Then she called Danes. They both arrived within 20 minutes. The police dusted for prints. Found nothing. Danes walked through slowly, cataloging what was missing. What was on the laptop? He asked. Just personal stuff, some nursing journals. Nothing related to the case. You sure? Emily thought about it. I had copies of my military service records, awards, photos from deployment. Danes' face darkened. They're building a defense, looking for anything they can use to discredit you. Can they do that? Legally? No, but if they're desperate enough. He didn't finish the sentence. That night, Emily stayed in a hotel. She didn't feel safe in her apartment anymore. Didn't feel safe anywhere, really. She lay in the unfamiliar bed, staring at the ceiling, wondering how far Holloway would go to save himself. The next morning, she found out. Her phone exploded with notifications. Someone had leaked her medical records from the VA, old therapy notes from when she'd first come home from Afghanistan, sessions where she'd talked about nightmares, hypervigilance, the difficulty of adjusting to civilian life. The headlines were savage. Veteran nurse sought treatment for PTSD. Questions raised about stability. Emily read the articles with shaking hands. They'd twisted everything, made her sound unstable, dangerous, someone whose perception couldn't be trusted. She called Ramos immediately. I see it, Ramos said, and it's illegal. Medical records are protected. Someone's going to jail for this. But the damage is done. Maybe. Or maybe it backfires. People understand PTSD. They understand that seeking help is healthy. Holloway's team just showed how desperate they are. Emily wanted to believe that. But sitting in that hotel room, reading strangers dissect her mental health, she felt exposed in a way combat had never made her feel. Her phone rang. The colonel. "Shaw, you holding up?" "Barely, sir." "Good. That means you're still in the fight." He paused. "I saw the leaked records. It's unconscionable. But I want you to know something. Every soldier who's been in combat deals with this. The fact that you got help makes you smart, not weak. The public doesn't see it that way. Some don't. But the people who matter do. And I'm making some calls. By tomorrow, you're going to have veterans organizations backing you publicly. We're not letting them destroy you for having the courage to heal." Emily's eyes burned. "Thank you, sir. Thank me by winning. Take this bastard down." She hung up and stared at her phone. The notifications were still coming, but mixed in now were messages of support. Veterans sharing their own stories, nurses talking about the pressure to stay silent, people saying they believed her. The tide was turning, slowly, but turning. Emily checked out of the hotel and went back to her apartment. She cleaned up the mess, changed her locks, set up a security camera. Then she went to work. The ER felt different now. People looked at her with something between respect and pity. The residents who'd avoided her before now gave her space in a different way, not dismissive, but careful, like she might break. Rita pulled her aside midway through her shift. "You need to take some time off. I need to work. You need to breathe. If I stop moving, I'll fall apart." Rita studied her face. "Okay, but I'm watching you. And if I see you cracking, I'm pulling you off the floor." Emily nodded and went back to treating patients. Chest pain, broken bones, a kid with croup. Normal things, manageable things. She focused on the work because work had always been her anchor. At 11 p.m., during her break, she stood in the parking garage smoking a cigarette she'd bummed off a paramedic. She didn't even smoke. But standing there in the cold air, watching her breath mist in the fluorescent lights, felt like the only real moment she'd had in days. Footsteps echoed across the concrete. Emily turned. Marcus Holloway stood 20 feet away. His eyes were wild, his clothes rumpled like he'd been wearing them for days. "You've destroyed everything," he said. Emily's hand moved to her phone. "You're not supposed to be here. There's a restraining order." "I don't care about the restraining order. I don't care about any of it anymore." He took a step closer. "Do you have any idea what you've done? I've given 30 years to this hospital. 30 years. And you, some nobody nurse with delusions of importance, you've burned it all down. You did this to yourself. I corrected you during an emergency. That's all. And you've turned it into a federal case because you couldn't handle being told you were wrong." Emily felt something cold settle in her chest. "You grabbed me. You've been abusing staff for years, and the hospital covered it up because you made them money. I saved lives. So did the women you hurt." Holloway's face twisted. "You think you're special because you were in the military? You think that gives you the right to destroy me?" "I think it taught me that bullies only have power if you let them." He moved closer. Emily didn't back up. She'd faced worse than Marcus Holloway. She'd patched men back together while rockets fell. She'd held pressure on wounds while buildings shook. A surgeon having a breakdown in a parking garage wasn't going to make her flinch. "The trial will prove I'm innocent," Holloway said. His voice shook. "And then I'm going to sue you for everything, your reputation, your nursing license, everything. Then I'll see you in court." He stared at her. For a moment, something flickered in his eyes. Maybe the realization that he'd already lost, that all his power and prestige couldn't save him from what was coming. Then headlights swept across the garage. A security vehicle. Holloway turned and walked away, disappeared into the shadows between cars. Emily stood there breathing hard, her heart hammering. She waited until security pulled up and explained what happened. They called the police, filed a report, added another charge to the growing list. But as Emily drove home that night, she couldn't shake the look in Holloway's eyes. Not anger anymore, desperation. And desperate people did dangerous things. She kept the security report in her glove compartment, along with pepper spray and a recording device Agent Danes had given her. The restraining order violation would add to Holloway's charges, but Emily knew it wouldn't stop him. Men like that didn't stop until they were forced to. The next morning, she woke to her phone vibrating across the nightstand. Rita's name flashed on the screen. "Turn on the news." Emily fumbled for the remote. Channel 7 was already running footage, not of the hospital this time, of a press conference. Marcus Holloway stood behind a podium flanked by lawyers in expensive suits, looking like he'd aged 5 years in 2 weeks. "I have dedicated my entire career to saving lives," Holloway said into the microphones. His voice was steady now, controlled. "What is happening to me is a coordinated attack by disgruntled former employees and an overzealous federal investigation seeking to make an example of a successful physician. I have never assaulted anyone. I have never harassed anyone, and I will prove my innocence in court." The reporters shouted questions. Holloway ignored them and walked away, his legal team forming a barrier around him. Emily muted the television. Her hands were steady, but her stomach churned. "He's playing victim," Rita said on the phone, "making himself look persecuted. It might work. Not if we don't let it." Rita paused. "There's a counter press conference being organized. Nurses who worked under him. Some of the women from the settlements who are willing to speak now. They want you there." "When?" "This afternoon, downtown. The Veterans Coalition is co-sponsoring it." Emily closed her eyes. Standing in front of cameras, letting the world watch her again. Every instinct told her to hide. But hiding meant Holloway controlled the story. "I'll be there." The press conference was held outside the federal courthouse at 3 p.m. Emily arrived early and found herself surrounded by people she'd never met. Veterans in uniform, nurses she recognized from articles, advocates from organizations she'd only heard of. The colonel was there too, standing with a group of officers. He pulled her aside. "You ready for this?" "No." "Good answer. The ones who say they're ready are usually lying." He handed her a folder. "These are letters from every member of your unit in Kandahar, 47 soldiers who served with you, every one of them vouching for your character and competence. I figured you might need reminders that you're not alone." Emily opened the folder with shaking hands. The first letter was from a sergeant she'd saved after an IED took his leg. The second from a private she'd pulled from a collapsed building. Letter after letter, all saying the same thing. Emily Shaw was the reason they were alive. She closed the folder before she started crying. "Thank you, sir." "Don't thank me. Just tell the truth." The press conference started with a victim's advocate reading a statement. Then came 3 women who'd taken settlements years ago, but had decided to break their NDAs despite the legal risk. Each told stories that sounded painfully familiar. Verbal abuse. Physical intimidation. The hospital's legal team showing up with money and threats. Then it was Emily's turn. She stepped up to the microphone cluster and looked out at the cameras and reporters and strangers with phones recording. Her mouth went dry. "My name is Emily Shaw. I'm a registered nurse and a former Army combat medic. On September 23rd, during a critical emergency, Dr. Marcus Holloway physically assaulted me in front of witnesses because I prioritized patient care over his ego." Her voice didn't shake. Military training held. "What happened to me isn't unique. It's part of a pattern that Brighton Falls Medical Center enabled for years. They protected Dr. Holloway because he was profitable. They silenced women because it was cheaper than accountability. And when I refused to take their settlement, they suspended me and tried to make me disappear." The cameras flashed. Reporters scribbled notes. "I'm not here for revenge. I'm here because the next nurse who gets grabbed by a doctor shouldn't have to fight this fight alone. Healthcare workers deserve to feel safe at work. Patients deserve to know that hospitals protect staff instead of predators. And people in power need to learn that no amount of prestige or money puts them above basic human decency." She stepped back from the microphone. The reporters erupted with questions. Emily ignored them and walked back to where the colonel stood. "That was good," he said quietly. "It didn't feel good. It wasn't supposed to, but you did it anyway." That evening, the press conference footage went viral. Emily's face was everywhere. Her words were quoted on national news. The hashtag protect healthcare workers trended for 6 hours. Support flooded in from nurses across the country sharing their own stories of abuse and retaliation. But the backlash came just as hard. Holloway's supporters organized. They called Emily a liar, an opportunist, a broken veteran who couldn't handle authority. Anonymous accounts dug up old photos from her deployment and twisted them into evidence of instability. Emily stopped reading comments. She went to work and focused on patients. Chest pain. Diabetic crisis. A construction worker with a nail through his hand. Real problems with real solutions. 3 days after the press conference, Agent Danes called her at 2 a.m. "We have a problem." Emily sat up in bed, instantly alert. "What kind of problem?" "Two of our witnesses just recanted their statements." "What? Why?" "They won't say, but both received substantial deposits into their bank accounts 3 days ago. We're tracing the money, but it looks like someone's buying silence." Emily's jaw clenched. "Holloway. We can't prove it yet, but yeah, probably. And if he's doing this to 2 witnesses, he might be approaching others." "Can't you stop him?" "Not legally. He's out on bail. As long as he doesn't directly threaten anyone or violate restraining orders, we can't prevent him from making contact." Danes exhaled roughly. "Emily, I need to ask. Has anyone approached you with money?" "No." "If they do, record everything. Don't engage beyond what's necessary to document, and call me immediately." "You think he'll try to buy me off?" "I think he'll try anything to avoid prison." Emily didn't sleep the rest of that night. She lay in bed playing through scenarios. Holloway approaching her, offering money, making threats. She'd say no, obviously. But how many others would say yes? How many witnesses would disappear before the trial? At 5 a.m., she gave up on sleep and went for a run. The streets were empty, dawn just breaking over Brighton Falls. She pushed herself hard, trying to outrun the anxiety twisting in her chest. When she got back, there was an envelope taped to her apartment door. No postage, no return address, just her name written in block letters. Emily's training kicked in. She photographed it before touching it. Then she opened it carefully, aware it might be evidence. Inside was a single page, typed, no signature. "You have 48 hours to drop the charges and issue a public apology. If you don't, information about your time in Kandahar will be released, specifically the incident from March 2019 that your unit covered up. Think carefully about what you're willing to sacrifice for this crusade." Emily read it twice. Her hands started shaking. March 2019. She knew exactly what they were talking about. The ambush that killed her supervising officers had been chaos. Incoming fire from multiple directions. Casualties everywhere. In the confusion, one of her soldiers, a kid named Torres, had fired on what he thought was an insurgent position. Turned out to be civilians sheltering in a bombed-out building. 3 dead. 2 wounded. The investigation had cleared Torres, ruled it a tragic mistake in an active combat zone. But the guilt had destroyed him anyway. He'd eaten his sidearm 6 months after they got home. Emily had carried that night with her ever since. The screaming, the blood, Torres's face when he realized what he'd done. And now someone was threatening to twist it into evidence that she was reckless, unstable, responsible for civilian deaths. She called Danes immediately. He arrived 30 minutes later with Ramos and a forensics team. They photographed the letter, dusted for prints, analyzed the paper. "It's a bluff," Ramos said after reading it. "The Kandahar incident was investigated and closed. There's nothing to uncover." "But they can leak it selectively," Emily said. "Make it look worse than it was. Tie me to civilian casualties right before the trial. We'll get ahead of it, issue a statement explaining what happened, full transparency." "That won't matter. People will see the headline and decide I'm guilty." Danes folded his arms. "So what do you want to do?" Emily looked at the letter sitting in its evidence bag. 48 hours. Drop the charges. Apologize publicly. Let Holloway win. "I want to finish this." "You sure?" "I'm sure." The next 2 days were excruciating. Emily waited for the story to drop, checked news sites compulsively. Every notification made her flinch, but nothing came. The deadline passed with no leak. Maybe it had been a bluff after all. Then, on the 3rd day, her past caught up to her anyway. She was halfway through her ER shift when a military police vehicle pulled into the hospital parking lot. 2 MPs walked into the emergency department and asked for Emily Shaw. Rita's face went white. "What's this about?" "Ma'am, we need to speak with Nurse Shaw regarding her service record." Emily met them at the nurse's station. Her heart hammered, but she kept her face calm. "I'm Emily Shaw." "Ma'am, we need you to come with us. There's been a request to review your discharge paperwork and service records related to an incident in Afghanistan." "On whose authority?" "Defense Department Inspector General." Emily's stomach dropped. Someone had gone over the federal investigator's head straight to military oversight. Someone with connections and money. Am I under investigation? We're not at liberty to discuss details, but you're required to cooperate. Rita stepped forward. She's in the middle of a shift. People need care. We understand, but this is time sensitive. Emily looked at Rita. Cover for me. Emily, it's fine. I'll handle it. She followed the MPs out to their vehicle. They drove her to the regional military office 40 minutes away. The whole trip, Emily's mind raced. The IG didn't reopen closed investigations without cause. Someone had fed them information, probably twisted information, and she had no idea what she was walking into. The interview room was gray and cold. Two officers sat across from her, a major and a captain, both with the detached professionalism that came with conducting internal reviews. Sergeant Shaw, the major began. We're reviewing your service record in light of recent public attention. Specifically, we need to discuss the incident on March 15, 2019. That incident was investigated and cleared. We're aware, but new information has come to light suggesting the investigation may have been incomplete. What new information? The major slid a folder across the table. Inside were statements, typed witness accounts from soldiers Emily had served with. Only these accounts didn't match what actually happened. They described Emily as reckless, making poor decisions under pressure, ignoring protocol in ways that endangered lives. These are lies, Emily said flatly. They're sworn statements from members of your unit. Then someone got to my unit, paid them or threatened them or both. That's a serious accusation. So is reopening a closed investigation to discredit a federal witness? The captain leaned forward. Sergeant Shaw, we're simply doing our due diligence. If you have nothing to hide, I have nothing to hide. The Torres incident was a tragedy, but it was cleared by 3 separate investigations. Combat is chaos. People make mistakes. That doesn't make them criminals. And yet 3 civilians died. Emily felt her control slipping. And I've carried that weight every day since, just like Torres did before he killed himself. Just like every soldier who's ever been in combat carries the cost of impossible decisions. But you don't get to weaponize that against me because I'm testifying against a doctor who assaulted me. The major's expression didn't change. This review will take approximately 2 weeks. You're not to leave the state during that time. Am I being charged with anything? Not at this time. Then am I free to go? For now. Emily stood and walked out. Her legs felt shaky, but she made it to the parking lot before the anger hit. She sat in her car and called Danes. They went after my military record. I heard. We're pushing back through DoD channels, but someone high up authorized this review. How high up? We're trying to find out, but Emily, this is bigger than Holloway. Someone with serious resources is running interference. The hospital board. Maybe. Or their donors, or people who have a lot to lose if this case exposes the whole rotten system. Emily drove back to Brighton Falls in silence. She thought about Torres, about the night he died. He'd called her from a motel room, drunk and crying, talking about the civilians he'd killed. Emily had tried to talk him down, told him it wasn't his fault, told him to get help. An hour later, the police found his body. She'd failed to save him. And now someone was using that failure to destroy her credibility. When she got home, Catherine Pierce was waiting outside her apartment. You look like hell, Catherine said. I feel worse. I heard about the military review. I've been digging into who requested it. Found some interesting connections. Emily unlocked her door. You want to come in or talk in the hallway? Catherine followed her inside. Holloway's lead attorney is a man named Gregory Walsh. Big firm, represents corporations and wealthy individuals. I traced his client list. 3 members of Brighton Falls Medical Center's board have used his services. So has the hospital's largest private donor, a pharmaceutical executive named Robert Hastings. So Walsh has leverage over the board. More than that, Walsh's firm has a specialty, making problems disappear. They've handled dozens of cases involving workplace abuse, harassment, discrimination. Almost all settled with NDAs, almost none went to trial. Emily sat down heavily on her couch. They're not just defending Holloway, they're defending the system that protected him. Exactly. And if you win, it sets a precedent. Other victims might come forward, other institutions might face scrutiny. Walsh can't let that happen. So what do I do? Catherine pulled out her recorder. You fight back. On the record. I'm writing a follow-up article about the tactics they're using against you. The witness intimidation, the military review, the leaked medical records. Show people how desperate they are. Emily thought about it. Every time she went public, the attacks intensified. But staying silent meant letting them control the narrative. Write the article, she said. Catherine's piece ran 2 days later. The cost of speaking out, how a powerful legal team is trying to destroy a whistleblower. It detailed everything. The recanted witnesses, the mysterious money transfers, the military review triggered by false statements. The article connected Walsh to the hospital board and showed the pattern of cases his firm had buried over decades. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Veterans organizations issued statements condemning the attacks on Emily's service record. Nursing unions called for federal protection of healthcare whistleblowers. Even some lawmakers started making noise about investigation into witness tampering. But Holloway's team pushed back harder. They released their own statement claiming Emily was orchestrating a smear campaign to profit from her accusations. They leaked emails she'd sent to coworkers. Casual complaints about long shifts and difficult patients, now spun as evidence of a bad attitude and professional incompetence. The battle played out in headlines and talk shows and social media. Brighton Falls became ground zero for a national conversation about power, abuse, and whether institutions could police themselves. And through it all, Emily kept working. She showed up for shifts, treated patients, pretended everything was normal while her life fell apart in public. Until the night Holloway broke. It was 11 p.m. on a Thursday. Emily was restocking supply carts when the power flickered. Not unusual, the hospital's electrical system was aging and storms could cause brownouts. But this felt different. The lights stabilized, then flickered again. The emergency generators kicked in, bathing the ER in harsh backup lighting. Somewhere in the building, an alarm started wailing. Rita appeared, looking confused. That's not the fire alarm. What is it? I don't know. A security guard rushed past, then another. Emily's instincts prickled. Something's wrong. They followed the guards toward the administrative wing. Other staff members were converging, drawn by the commotion. The alarm got louder. They rounded a corner and found a crowd gathered outside the hospital director's office. Through the glass walls, Emily could see figures inside. Security, hospital administration, and Marcus Holloway. He was standing in the middle of the office, a bottle of pills in one hand and a letter in the other. His face was pale and streaked with tears. Even from the hallway, Emily could see he was shaking. He's trying to kill himself, someone whispered. Rita grabbed Emily's arm. Stay back! But Emily was already moving forward. She pushed through the crowd, past the security guards trying to establish a perimeter, and stepped into the office. Emily, stop! Rita called. Holloway looked up. His eyes were wild, unfocused. Get out! Not happening. Emily kept her voice calm, clinical, the same tone she'd used with soldiers who were bleeding out and panicking. What did you take? Doesn't matter. It does if I'm going to save your life. I don't want you to save my life. I want you to watch me die knowing you did this. Emily took a step closer. How many pills? 20, maybe 30. I stopped counting. She could see the bottle now. Prescription opioids, high dose. If he'd actually taken 30, they had maybe 20 minutes before respiratory depression killed him. What did you write in the letter? The truth, that this hospital drove me to this, that you destroyed everything I built. You destroyed it yourself when you put your hands on me. Holloway's face twisted. I never meant to hurt you, any of you. I was just trying to maintain standards. By terrorizing people? By demanding excellence. Emily assessed him rapidly. Slurred speech, dilated pupils, unsteady on his feet. He'd definitely taken something, though whether it was a lethal dose or a cry for help remained to be seen. Behind her, she could hear Rita calling for a doctor, security talking into radios, the alarm still blaring. Emily focused on Holloway. You need to sit down before you fall down. I don't need anything from you. Yes, you do. You need me to save you, because if you die right now, you never get to prove your innocence. You never get your day in court. You just become another headline about a disgraced doctor who couldn't face justice. That broke through. Holloway's eyes focused slightly. I want my day in court, he said. I want to tell everyone what really happened. Then sit down and let me help you. For a long moment, he just stared at her. Then his legs gave out and he collapsed into a chair. Emily was on him in seconds. She grabbed the pill bottle from his hand, checked the label, calculated dosage. 30 80-milligram oxycodone tablets would be enough to kill him twice over if he'd really taken that many. I need activated charcoal and IV naloxone, she called to the crowd. Now! Staff scrambled. Emily checked Holloway's pulse. Thready, racing. His breathing was already slowing. She tilted his head back to maintain his airway. Stay with me, Marcus. You don't get to die before you face what you did. I didn't do anything wrong, he slurred. Tell it to the jury. The crash cart arrived. Emily worked fast, placing an IV line and pushing naloxone. The opioid antagonist would reverse the overdose if administered in time, but it would also throw Holloway into immediate withdrawal. Painful, but better than dead. Within 60 seconds, Holloway's eyes snapped open. He gasped, then vomited. Emily rolled him to his side, kept his airway clear, monitored his vitals. I've got him, a doctor said, arriving with more medical staff. Emily stepped back. Her hands were shaking now, adrenaline crash hitting hard. She watched them load Holloway onto a gurney, watched him fight weakly against the restraints they were applying, watched the man who terrorized her reduced to a pathetic figure being wheeled to the ICU. Rita pulled her into the hallway. You okay? I don't know what I am. You just saved the life of the man who's been trying to destroy you. Emily looked at her hands, still shaking. I couldn't just let him die. Why not? It would have solved everything. Because I'm a nurse and I took an oath. Emily met Rita's eyes. And because he doesn't get to escape this by dying. He needs to face everything he's done, every woman he hurt, every life he damaged. He needs to sit in a courtroom and hear their testimony and know that the whole world sees him for what he is. Rita shook her head slowly. You're either the strongest person I've ever met or the craziest. Maybe both. Emily went home 3 hours later after giving statements to hospital security and the police. The sun was rising as she pulled into her parking spot. She sat in her car watching the light change, too exhausted to move. Her phone rang. Agent Danes. I heard what happened, he said. Hell of a thing. Yeah. For what it's worth, you probably just guaranteed your credibility at trial. Defense was going to paint you as vindictive and unstable. Hard to make that stick when you literally saved his life. Emily hadn't thought about that. I didn't do it for strategy. I know. That's why it matters. She hung up and finally dragged herself inside. Stood in the shower until the hot water ran out, collapsed into bed. She slept for 4 hours and woke to her phone vibrating with messages. Most were supportive, people praising her for saving Holloway despite everything. But buried in the notifications was a text from an unknown number. You should have let me die. Now you'll wish you had. Emily stared at the message. Then she screenshot it and sent it to Danes. His response came immediately. That's a direct threat. We're filing for immediate remand. Holloway's going to jail tonight. But when federal marshals arrived at the hospital that evening, Marcus Holloway was gone. He'd checked himself out of the ICU against medical advice 3 hours earlier. Security footage showed him leaving through a side exit, walking unsteadily but deliberately. No one knew where he'd gone. And Emily realized with cold certainty that the man she'd saved was now hunting her. The manhunt started within the hour. Federal marshals put out an alert. Local police circulated Holloway's photo. Emily's apartment got a patrol car stationed outside, and Agent Danes assigned a protective detail, 2 federal agents who followed her everywhere like shadows. She hated it, hated feeling like prey, hated that Holloway's desperation had given him back some twisted form of power. But she went to work anyway. Showed up for her shift the next morning with her 2-agent escort trailing behind. The ER staff stared but didn't ask questions. Rita just handed her a patient chart and said, Room 4, kidney stone. Normal felt impossible, but Emily tried anyway. For 3 days, nothing happened. Holloway stayed gone. No sightings, no contact. The silence was worse than threats because Emily's imagination filled it with possibilities. Was he planning something, watching her? The not knowing ate at her concentration. On day 4, Agent Danes showed up at the hospital with news. We found his car, he said. Abandoned at a rest stop 30 miles outside Brighton Falls. No sign of him. So he's on foot? Or someone picked him up? We're checking traffic cameras, but Dane shook his head. He could be anywhere. Emily felt cold. You think he's coming after me? I think he's unraveling. People in that state make bad decisions. He paused. There's something else. We executed a warrant on his home office this morning. Found files he'd been keeping. Personal information on staff members. Photos, schedules, notes about vulnerabilities. He was stalking people. For years. You weren't the first person he targeted, Emily. You were just the one who didn't break. That night, Emily couldn't sleep. She lay in bed listening to every sound, cars passing, pipes creaking, her neighbors moving around upstairs. The federal agents were posted in a vehicle outside, but that didn't make her feel safer, just more aware of the danger. At 2 a.m., her phone rang. Unknown number. She should have let it go to voicemail, should have called Dane's immediately. Instead, she answered. Hello? Breathing on the other end. Then Holloway's voice, rough and broken. You ruined me. Emily sat up, instantly alert. Where are you? Does it matter? Everything's gone. My career, my reputation. 30 years erased because you couldn't follow a simple order. You put your hands on me, Marcus. You did this to yourself. I was correcting you during an emergency. That's all. Everything else, the investigation, the charges, the media circus, that's you. You and your self-righteous crusade. Emily grabbed her other phone and texted Danes. He's calling me. Trace it. Why are you calling? She asked, keeping him talking. Because I want you to understand what you've done. I saved thousands of lives. Thousands. And now I'm a fugitive because one nurse had an ego problem. 23 women, Marcus. 23. It wasn't just me. They took settlements. They moved on. But you had to make yourself a martyr. Had to destroy everyone around you to feel important. Is that what you tell yourself? Emily's voice hardened. That we're the problem? Not the surgeon who threw instruments at staff and shoved women into walls. I demanded excellence. You demanded submission. There's a difference. Silence stretched. Emily could hear him breathing, ragged and uneven. I should have let you fail, Holloway said finally. That cardiac case. If I just stepped back and let you kill that patient, you'd be the one facing charges. But I didn't fail, and she survived. And you grabbed me anyway because you couldn't stand that I was right. You were never right. You were lucky. Then I guess luck beats cruelty. Holloway made a sound, might have been a laugh or a sob. You think you've won, but even if I go to prison, you'll never escape this. Every hospital you work at, someone will know your name. Know you're the nurse who destroyed a renowned surgeon. They'll wonder if you're worth the risk. Let them wonder. I can live with people knowing I stood up to a bully. Can you live with knowing you drove a man to attempt suicide? Emily's grip tightened on her phone. You drove yourself there. I just refused to be your victim. The line went dead. Emily called Danes immediately. Did you get it? We're tracing now. Cell tower triangulation puts him in the city. We're narrowing it down. He sounded, Emily searched for the word, resigned, like he's made some kind of decision. That's what I'm afraid of. People who sound resigned are either giving up or past caring about consequences. Danes' voice was tense. Stay inside. Keep your detail close. But Emily couldn't just sit and wait. She paced her apartment, replaying the conversation. Something in Holloway's tone bothered her. Not just the resignation, but the specificity. Even if I go to prison. Like he'd already accepted that outcome. So what was he planning? The answer came at dawn. Emily woke to pounding on her door. One of the federal agents, looking grim. Turn on the news. She grabbed the remote. Every local channel was carrying the same story. Breaking news from Brighton Falls Medical Center. Holloway had turned himself in. Not to federal marshals or police. He'd walked into the hospital at 5 a.m., gone straight to the administrative wing, and locked himself in the boardroom with the hospital's entire executive team. Security footage showed him holding them at gunpoint while he made demands. What does he want? Emily asked. You, the agent said. He's asking for you specifically. Says he'll release the hostages if you come talk to him. Emily's blood went cold. That's insane. FBI's on scene. They're setting up negotiation, but The agent looked uncomfortable. He's got 7 people in there: hospital, CFO, legal counsel, members of the board. If he starts shooting, I need to go. Absolutely not. The FBI will handle. He won't hurt me. Emily was already grabbing her jacket. He wants an audience. He wants to justify himself. If I don't show up, people might die. The drive to Brighton Falls Medical Center felt surreal. Police barricades blocked the streets. News vans crowded the perimeter. Emily's federal escort got her through the checkpoints and into the command center they'd set up in a nearby office building. The FBI lead negotiator was a woman named Sarah Chen, calm, professional, clearly in control. She looked at Emily with something between respect and concern. "He's been asking for you every 15 minutes, Sarah said, "but I need you to understand something. You walk in there, you become a hostage. We can't guarantee your safety." "What are his demands?" "He wants public exoneration, wants you to admit on camera that you fabricated the assault allegations, wants all charges dropped and a formal apology from the hospital." "None of that's going to happen." "I know. But right now, we need to keep him talking and the hostages alive. If you're willing to make contact, just over the phone, not in person, it might buy us time." Emily looked at the video feed showing the boardroom. 7 people sat along one wall, hands zip-tied behind them. Holloway paced with a handgun, gesturing wildly as he spoke. Even without audio, she could see he was breaking down. "Put me on with him." Sarah handed her a phone connected to the boardroom line. It rang twice before Holloway answered. "Emily," his voice was eerily calm, "thank you for calling." "Let those people go, Marcus. They didn't do anything to you." "They enabled everything. Every complaint buried, every settlement paid, every woman silenced. They're as guilty as anyone. So make them face charges. Let the legal system handle it." "The legal system?" Holloway laughed bitterly. "The same system that's been systematically destroying my life based on your word alone? Based on evidence, based on testimony from multiple victims, based on security footage, taken out of context." Emily heard someone whimper in the background. "The hostages." "Marcus, please, you're a doctor. You took an oath to do no harm." "So did you, and yet you've harmed me beyond repair." "I told the truth." "That's not harm. That's accountability. It's revenge, wrapped in self-righteous language, but revenge all the same." Holloway's voice dropped. "I want you to come here. Face me. Look me in the eye and tell me I deserve to lose everything." "I can't do that." "Then people will die." The line went dead. Sarah immediately started coordinating with her team. Emily stood frozen, replaying Holloway's words, the desperation underneath the bravado. The man was past rational thought, operating on pure emotion. "I need to go in," Emily said. "Not happening," Sarah replied without looking up from her tactical displays. "He'll kill them if I don't." "He might kill you if you do. I'm not trading one hostage for another." "I'm not just another hostage. I'm the one he wants to talk to, and I'm trained for high-stress situations. I spent 18 months in combat zones." Sarah finally looked at her. "Military training doesn't prepare you for negotiating with an armed, unstable man who blames you for destroying his life." "No, but it taught me how to stay calm when people are shooting. That's more preparation than most." Rita appeared in the doorway, breathless. "Emily, don't do this. Those people are in there because of me." "They're in there because Holloway's lost his mind. That's not your fault." "Maybe not, but I can end it." Sarah made a decision. "If you go in, you wear a wire. You follow my instructions exactly. And the second things go sideways, you hit the floor and let my team handle it." Emily nodded. They fitted her with a tiny microphone and an earpiece, briefed her on de-escalation tactics, showed her the building layout and where the tactical team would be positioned. It all felt surreal, like preparing for a mission she never thought she'd have to run. At 9 a.m., Emily walked through the hospital's main entrance. The building had been evacuated except for emergency personnel and the tactical team hidden throughout. Her footsteps echoed in the empty corridors. She took the stairs to the administrative wing. Every step felt heavy. By the time she reached the boardroom door, her heart was hammering. She knocked. "Come in," Holloway called. "Slowly, hands where I can see them." Emily opened the door. The scene inside was worse than the video feed suggested. The hostages looked terrified. One woman was crying silently. Another had blood on her shirt. Not hers, but maybe from Holloway's earlier overdose attempt. Holloway stood at the far end of the room, gun pointed loosely at the floor. He looked terrible, unshaven, pale, with the wild eyes of someone who hadn't slept in days. "You came," he said. "I came." "Close the door." Emily did. She heard Sarah's voice in her earpiece. "Keep him talking. We need time." "What do you want, Marcus?" "I want people to understand. I'm not a monster. I'm a surgeon who dedicated his life to saving others, and I'm being crucified for maintaining standards. You assaulted me. I corrected you during an emergency. You grabbed me, shoved me, humiliated me in front of witnesses. That's assault, not correction." Holloway's hand tightened on the gun. "You were too slow. That patient could have died." "But she didn't, and I was doing my job. Your ego just couldn't handle that a nurse knew what she was doing." "My ego?" Holloway's voice rose. "You think this is about ego?" "Yes. You needed everyone beneath you to stay beneath you, and when I wouldn't, you punished me for it." One of the hostages, the CFO, spoke up, his voice shaking. "Marcus, please, let us go. We can work something out." "Shut up." Holloway swung the gun toward him. "You're the ones who created this situation, paying off victims, burying complaints. You turned this hospital into a protection racket for abusers because it was profitable." "We were trying to protect the institution," the CFO stammered. "You were protecting yourselves. And when the truth came out, you hung me out to dry." Holloway looked back at Emily. "They offered me a deal, you know. Take the fall. Accept prison time. Keep the hospital's systemic problems out of the headlines. Make it all about one bad doctor instead of decades of institutional rot." Emily felt something click into place. "That's what this is about. You're not trying to escape justice. You're trying to make sure everyone goes down with you." Holloway smiled grimly. "I spent 3 days gathering evidence. Files from my home office, emails, financial records. I know where all the bodies are buried because I helped bury them, and now everyone's going to know." He pulled a flash drive from his pocket and tossed it to Emily. She caught it reflexively. "That's everything. 20 years of corruption. Proof that the board knew about complaints and actively suppressed them. Proof that the hospital's insurance company paid settlements without ever investigating if they were justified. Proof that this entire institution was built on silencing victims." Sarah's voice in Emily's ear. "Get him to release the hostages. Trade the evidence." "If you give me this, will you let them go?" Emily asked. "No." Holloway's expression hardened. "They stay until the press arrives, until cameras are rolling and the world is watching. Then I'll talk. I'll tell everything, and these people will finally face consequences." "Marcus, you're holding innocent people at gunpoint. They're not innocent. None of us are." Emily took a careful step forward. "You're right. The system protected you. The board enabled you. The hospital chose profit over people. But this, holding hostages, threatening violence, this doesn't fix anything. It just proves their narrative that you're unstable and dangerous." "I am dangerous. I've always been dangerous." "That's what surgeons are. People who cut into bodies and hope they don't kill anyone. We're all one mistake away from being murderers." "Then don't make that mistake now. Put the gun down. Hand over the evidence. Let the truth come out the right way." "There is no right way. The system is designed to protect people like them." Holloway gestured at the hostages. "Rich, connected, powerful. They'll lawyer up. They'll settle. They'll make it all go away." "Not if the evidence is public. Not if I testify to what's on that drive." Holloway studied her. "Why would you do that? They tried to destroy you too. Because I want real justice. Not revenge, not violence, justice." Emily held up the flash drive. "This can bury them, but only if you let me take it to the federal investigators and let them do their job." For a long moment, Holloway said nothing. The gun wavered in his hand. Emily could see him calculating, weighing his options, trying to find an angle that didn't end with him dead or in prison. Then his shoulders slumped. "It doesn't matter," he said quietly. "I'm already finished. This is just deciding how many people I take with me. So take them legally. Take them with evidence and testimony and a jury verdict. Don't give them the satisfaction of dying a villain when you could live long enough to watch them fall." Holloway looked at the gun in his hand like he'd forgotten he was holding it. Then he looked at Emily. "You really saved my life the other night," he said. "Why?" "Because I'm a nurse. and you were dying. Even though I tried to destroy you. Even though. Something in his face cracked. I don't understand you. I don't understand you either, but I know you're not stupid. You know this ends one of two ways, prison or dead, and prison at least gives you a chance to tell your story. Holloway's hand lowered slightly. The gun pointed at the floor. The hostages held their breath. Then, in the distance, Emily heard something. Sirens. Multiple vehicles approaching fast. Holloway heard it too. His eyes widened. What did you do? He demanded. I didn't do anything. But Sarah's voice in her earpiece was urgent. Emily, hospital security just reported another situation. Holloway's attorney, Gregory Walsh, just arrived with a team of private security. They're trying to breach the police perimeter. Emily's blood went cold. Walsh was making a move, trying to control the situation before Holloway could expose everything. She looked at the CFO, at the legal counsel, at the board members. They were all staring at the door with expressions that weren't relief. They were afraid of being rescued, because rescue meant Walsh would make sure they stayed silent, and Holloway would disappear, either into custody so deep he'd never be heard from again, or into a grave. Marcus, Emily said urgently, whatever you're planning to do it now, because in about 2 minutes, Walsh is going to storm this room and make sure you never talk. Holloway looked from Emily to the door to the hostages, making his decision. Then he dropped the gun. Get them out, he said, all of them, and make sure that flash drive reaches the FBI. Sarah's voice, move now. Emily grabbed the gun and kicked it away. The door burst open and tactical teams swarmed in, securing Holloway and evacuating the hostages. Emily was pulled into the hallway by federal agents while the scene behind her erupted into controlled chaos. And through the building's front windows, she could see Gregory Walsh's vehicle screeching to a halt as FBI agents blocked his path. Too late. The evidence was already in federal hands, and Marcus Holloway was alive to testify about all of it. The federal agents escorted Emily to a secured room 3 floors down while the tactical team finished clearing the building. Her hands were still shaking from adrenaline. She'd just talked down an armed man holding 7 hostages, and her body was only now catching up to what her mind had already processed. Agent Danes appeared with coffee and a blanket. You did good. Emily wrapped the blanket around her shoulders. Did they get Walsh? He's in custody. Tried to claim he was there as Holloway's legal counsel, but we have recordings of him instructing his security team to breach a federal operation. That's obstruction at minimum. What about the flash drive? Our tech team is going through it now. Preliminary review shows exactly what Holloway claimed. 20 years of systematic cover-up, emails between board members discussing how to suppress complaints, financial records showing settlements paid without investigations, documentation of threatened medical licenses. It's damning. Emily closed her eyes. How many people? Victims? At least 47 that we've identified so far. Holloway, 3 other doctors, 2 administrators. Brighton Falls Medical Center has been operating like a criminal enterprise disguised as a hospital. The number hit Emily like a physical blow. 47. 47 people silenced, paid off, threatened into disappearing. What happens now? She asked. Now we build cases against everyone involved. Board members, executives, legal counsel, hospitals, insurance carriers. This is going to be the biggest healthcare corruption scandal in state history. Dane sat down across from her. And you're going to be the star witness. Emily had known this was coming, but hearing it confirmed made her stomach turn. When does the trial start? Holloway's will probably begin in 3 months. The others will follow. You're looking at a year of testimony, minimum. A year? Maybe longer. Defense teams are going to fight this hard. Lots of powerful people have a lot to lose. Emily thought about a year of courtrooms and cross-examinations and strangers dissecting her life. A year of reliving the worst moments over and over. A year of being the woman who brought down Brighton Falls Medical Center. Can I refuse? You could. But then most of these cases fall apart. The documentary evidence is strong, but juries want to hear from victims. They need to see faces and hear voices to understand the human cost. Danes leaned forward. I know it's asking a lot, but you're the only one who refused the settlement. You're the only one who stood up when it mattered. These other victims need you to finish what you started. Emily knew he was right. She'd come this far, walked into a room with an armed man, saved his life twice, refused to be silenced or intimidated or bought off. Turning back now would make it all meaningless. I'll testify, she said. All of them, however long it takes. The news broke within hours. Every major outlet picked up the story. Hostage situation exposes massive healthcare corruption scandal. The footage of federal agents leading Gregory Walsh away in handcuffs played on repeat. Reporters camped outside the hospital. Brighton Falls became national news again, but this time the focus shifted from Emily to the institution that had protected abusers for decades. The hospital board held an emergency meeting and voted to shut down Brighton Falls Medical Center permanently. They claimed it was voluntary, but everyone knew the truth. Federal seizure of assets was imminent. Criminal investigations were expanding. Insurance companies were pulling coverage. The place was radioactive. Emily watched the announcement from her apartment, watched the hospital director's stilted statement about unprecedented circumstances and commitment to accountability. The words rang hollow. The board was already hiring lawyers, already preparing to fight, but something had shifted. The evidence was public now. Holloway's flash drive had been leaked, probably by someone in the federal investigation who wanted to ensure it couldn't be buried. Documents circulated online, news organizations published detailed breakdowns. The sheer scope of the corruption made it impossible to contain. Within a week, 3 board members resigned. 2 were arrested. The hospital's insurance carrier announced they were cooperating with investigators and releasing all sealed settlement files. The dam had broken completely. Rita called Emily almost daily with updates. Staff were finding new positions. Some were angry about losing their jobs. Others were relieved to escape an institution that had been rotting from the inside. The ER had been the hospital's heart, and watching it die felt surreal. "You okay?" Rita asked during one call. "I don't know what I am." "That's honest." Rita paused. "For what it's worth, you did the right thing, even if it cost people their jobs, even if it hurt. Sometimes the right thing requires burning everything down." Emily wasn't sure she believed that, but she was starting to understand it. The preliminary hearings began in November. Marcus Holloway appeared in court wearing an orange jumpsuit and wrist shackles. He'd been denied bail after the hostage situation. His attorney, not Walsh, who was facing his own charges, tried to argue diminished capacity. The judge wasn't buying it. Emily attended the hearing at the prosecution's request. She sat in the gallery and watched Holloway shuffle to the defendant's table. He looked smaller somehow, diminished. The man who terrorized her for 11 months was just a tired, middle-aged doctor facing the consequences of his choices. Their eyes met once. Holloway's expression was unreadable. Then he looked away. The judge read the charges: assault, kidnapping, obstruction of justice. The list went on. When she finished, Holloway's attorney entered a plea. "Not guilty, Your Honor." Emily had expected that. What surprised her was what happened next. The prosecutor stood. "Your Honor, the defendant has expressed interest in a cooperation agreement. In exchange for testimony against co-conspirators, the government is prepared to discuss reduced charges." The courtroom erupted in whispers. Emily's stomach twisted. Reduced charges meant Holloway might avoid the maximum sentence, might spend less time in prison, but it also meant he'd testify against everyone else, against the board members and executives and lawyers who'd enabled him, against the system that had protected him for decades. The judge called for order. "Mr. Holloway, do you understand that cooperation would require full disclosure and truthful testimony against others involved in these crimes?" Holloway stood slowly. "Yes, Your Honor." "And you're willing to do that?" For a long moment he said nothing. Then, "If it means the truth comes out, yes, I'm willing." Emily left the courthouse feeling dizzy. She'd wanted Holloway to face the maximum penalty, wanted him to suffer the way his victims had suffered. But she also understood the strategic value of his cooperation. His testimony could bring down everyone. Justice, she was learning, wasn't always clean or satisfying. Sometimes it was messy compromise in service of a larger goal. The weeks blurred together. More arrests, more resignations. The state medical board launched its own investigation into licensing practices. Federal prosecutors announced they were pursuing RICO charges against the hospital's former leadership. The scandal spread like wildfire through the healthcare industry. And through it all, Emily kept working. She'd taken a temporary position at Mercy General across town, smaller hospital, lower pay, But the staff treated her like a hero instead of a liability. Patients recognized her from news coverage. Some thanked her, others asked for autographs. It felt surreal. In December, the first trial began. Not Holloway's. His cooperation deal was still being negotiated. This was Linda Cortez, the director of nursing who'd sat across from Emily months ago and offered a settlement instead of support. Emily testified on day 3. She walked into the courtroom wearing professional clothes and no makeup, looking exactly like what she was, a nurse who'd been put through hell for telling the truth. The prosecutor asked her to describe the night of September 23rd. Emily did, in precise detail. The cardiac emergency, Holloway's grab, the suspension that followed, the settlement offer. And when Ms. Cortez offered you that settlement, did she express any concern for your well-being? Emily thought back to that conference room, Linda's uncomfortable expression, the way she'd avoided eye contact. No, she was concerned about protecting the hospital. Did she ask if you were okay? No. Did she ask if you needed medical attention or counseling? No, she asked me to sign an NDA and leave quietly. The defense attorney tried to shake her on cross-examination, suggested Emily had been insubordinate, implied she'd exaggerated the assault, brought up her military history, and hinted at PTSD affecting her perception. Emily stayed calm, answered each question directly, and when the attorney tried to suggest she'd orchestrated the whole scandal for attention, she looked him straight in the eye. I wanted to keep my job and be left alone. Dr. Holloway grabbed me. The hospital tried to silence me. And when I refused to disappear, they suspended me instead of investigating him. Those are facts, not perceptions. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. Guilty on all counts, obstruction of justice, conspiracy to suppress evidence, witness tampering. Linda Cortez was sentenced to 4 years in federal prison. 3 weeks later, the CFO went to trial. Then 2 board members. Emily testified at each one. The pattern was always the same: defense attorneys attacking her credibility, prosecutors presenting mountains of evidence, juries returning guilty verdicts. By February, 8 people had been convicted. Holloway's cooperation had been devastating. He'd provided testimony that corroborated every document, filled in gaps, explained the mechanics of how the hospital had systematically protected abusers. His willingness to destroy his former allies was almost pathological. Emily watched him testify once. He was calm, methodical, showing no emotion as he described how complaints were buried and victims were paid off. The man seemed empty, like he'd burned out everything inside himself and all that remained was the clinical precision of a surgeon describing a procedure. When the prosecutor asked why he'd participated in the cover-up, Holloway's answer was chilling. Because it was easier than confronting my own behavior, and because the hospital made it clear that protecting the institution was more important than protecting staff. Do you regret your actions? Holloway looked directly at the jury. I regret that I was allowed to continue for as long as I did. I regret that the system enabled me. But most of all, I regret that it took losing everything to understand the harm I caused. It wasn't quite an apology, but it was the closest thing to accountability Emily had heard from him. Marcus Holloway's trial began in March. Despite his cooperation, he still faced serious charges. The hostage situation couldn't be plea bargained away. Emily testified on the opening day, walking the jury through 11 months of abuse culminating in that night in the trauma bay. The defense tried to portray Holloway as a victim of his own success, argued that the pressure of maintaining a world-class cardiac program had caused a breakdown, suggested that his actions, while regrettable, were the result of systemic stress rather than malice. Emily sat through closing arguments feeling numb. She'd heard every possible excuse, every rationalization, every attempt to minimize what he'd done. The jury returned guilty verdicts on assault and false imprisonment from the hostage situation. The other charges, related to harassment and the broader conspiracy, resulted in a mixed verdict. Some guilty, some not guilty. At sentencing, the judge looked at Holloway with something like pity. Dr. Holloway, you were given extraordinary gifts, talent, education, opportunities most people never receive. You used those gifts to save lives, and that should be acknowledged. But you also used your position to terrorize staff, silence victims, and perpetuate a culture of abuse. Your cooperation with federal investigators demonstrates some capacity for accountability, but it doesn't erase the harm you caused. She sentenced him to 12 years in federal prison. Emily felt no satisfaction when the bailiff led him away. Just exhaustion. Just the hollow awareness that 12 years wouldn't give back what he'd taken from 47 people, wouldn't restore their dignity or erase their trauma. Justice had been served, but it didn't feel like victory. It felt like survival. The last trial ended in April. Gregory Walsh, the attorney who'd enabled the whole system, faced charges of obstruction and conspiracy. His conviction was almost anticlimactic. By then, Emily had testified so many times that the courtroom felt familiar. The questions predictable, the outcome inevitable. When it was finally over, all the trials, all the testimony, all the cross-examinations, Emily took a week off work. She drove to the coast, rented a cabin, and spent 7 days doing nothing but walking on the beach and sleeping without nightmares. On the last day, Rita called. "You sitting down?" "I'm looking at the ocean. What's up?" "I just got off the phone with North Haven Medical Institute." "You know them?" Emily did. They were a teaching hospital 200 miles north, prestigious, progressive, known for actually protecting staff. "They're offering you a position," Rita continued. "Head trauma nurse, leadership role, significant pay increase. And Emily, they specifically said they want you because of what you did, not in spite of it." Emily watched waves crash against rocks. "When do they want an answer?" 2 weeks. "But this is huge. North Haven is where nurses go when they want to actually make a difference." Emily thanked her and hung up. She sat on the beach until sunset, thinking about Brighton Falls and everything that had happened there, thinking about the woman she'd been when she arrived, quiet, invisible, trying to disappear into a normal life after war, and the woman she'd become, someone who'd refused to stay silent even when silence would have been easier. She thought about the 47 victims whose stories had finally been heard, about the nurses who'd sent her messages thanking her for giving them permission to speak up, about the healthcare workers across the country who'd started demanding better protections because Emily Shaw had proven it was possible to fight back and win. She accepted North Haven's offer the next morning. 3 months later, Emily stood in a brand new emergency department wearing fresh scrubs with E. Shaw, head trauma nurse, embroidered on the pocket. The facility was state-of-the-art. The staff was collaborative. The hospital's director had personally assured her that zero-tolerance policies for harassment were actually enforced. It felt strange at first, working somewhere that treated nurses like professionals instead of disposables, having supervisors who asked for her input, being in an environment where demanding excellence meant challenging the work, not the person. But slowly, Emily adjusted. She built new routines, made friends with coworkers who knew her story but didn't define her by it. Started training young nurses in trauma protocols, passing on skills she'd learned in war zones and civilian emergencies. She still had nightmares sometimes, still flinched when people raised their voices, still carried the weight of everything that had happened in Brighton Falls. But she was learning that trauma didn't have to be a life sentence. It could be a chapter, one part of a larger story. On her 6-month anniversary at North Haven, the hospital held a staff development seminar. Emily had been asked to speak about workplace safety and the importance of reporting abuse. She'd initially declined, public speaking still made her uncomfortable, but eventually agreed when the director explained it was for new hires who needed to understand the hospital's culture. She stood at the podium looking out at 50 faces. Most were young, fresh out of nursing school or residency, all of them eager to start careers in healthcare. "My name is Emily Shaw," she began. "And 6 months ago, I testified in federal court against a surgeon who assaulted me in a hospital that tried to silence me. I'm not going to give you the full story. You can look it up online if you're curious, but I want to tell you what I learned." She paused, gathering her thoughts. "I learned that staying silent doesn't protect you. It protects abusers. I learned that institutions will choose profit over people unless someone forces them to do otherwise. I learned that speaking up might cost you in the short term, but staying silent costs you forever." A few people nodded. Others looked uncomfortable. Emily pressed on. "I also learned that you're not alone. When I finally spoke up, I found out there were 23 other women who'd been hurt by the same person. 23. And they'd all stayed silent because they were scared, because they thought no one would believe them, because the system was designed to make them feel powerless." She looked around the room. "Here's what I want you to understand. You have power. Maybe not institutional power, maybe not the kind that comes with a title or a salary, but you have the power to refuse to be silent, the power to support each other, the power to demand that your workplace values human dignity over convenience. Someone in the back raised a hand. But what if reporting someone costs you your job? It might, Emily said honestly. It might cost you a lot. But I can tell you from experience that keeping your job isn't worth keeping your silence if that silence enables harm. And if you work somewhere that punishes you for reporting abuse, then that place doesn't deserve you anyway. She finished her talk and took questions. Afterward, several nurses approached her privately. Two shared stories of harassment they'd never reported. One asked for advice about a hostile attending. Emily listened to each one and gave the same answer: document everything, find witnesses, and report through official channels. And if the system failed them, go external, to licensing boards, to the press, to federal investigators. Because systems only changed when people refused to let them stay broken. That night, Emily drove home through North Haven's downtown. The city was smaller than Brighton Falls, but felt more alive somehow. She passed coffee shops and bookstores and parks where people walked dogs. Normal life, the kind she'd thought she wanted when she left the military. But normal had turned out to be more complicated than she'd expected. Normal included fighting for what was right even when it was hard. Normal included standing up for people who couldn't stand up for themselves. Normal included carrying your scars and using them to help others avoid the same wounds. She pulled into her apartment complex and sat in the car for a moment. Thought about the journey from that first day at Brighton Falls Medical Center to this moment. Thought about all the versions of herself she'd been: combat medic, civilian nurse, victim, witness, survivor. She thought about Marcus Holloway sitting in federal prison, about Linda Cortez and the board members, and Gregory Walsh all serving time, about Brighton Falls Medical Center's empty building being converted into affordable housing, about the 47 victims who'd finally been heard. The justice hadn't been perfect, the punishment hadn't erased the harm, but the truth had come out. The corruption had been exposed. And the next nurse who faced abuse wouldn't have to wonder if speaking up was worth it. They'd have Emily's story as proof that it was. She went inside, made dinner, and settled on the couch with a book. Her phone buzzed with a text from Rita. "Saw your seminar, got great feedback. Proud of you." Emily smiled and typed back, "Thanks. Still feels weird being the poster child for workplace safety. You earned it, and you're helping people. That's what matters." Emily set her phone down and opened her book, but her mind kept drifting back to that seminar, to the young nurses listening intently, to the ones who'd approached her afterward with stories they'd never told anyone. She thought about what the colonel had told her months ago. We take care of our own. That had meant something different in the military, but it applied here too. Healthcare workers taking care of each other, refusing to let anyone face abuse alone, building systems that protected instead of punished. Emily was part of that now. Not because she'd wanted to be, not because she'd set out to be a whistleblower or an advocate, but because circumstances had forced her to choose between silence and truth, and she'd chosen truth even when it cost her everything. She'd survived combat. She'd survived workplace abuse. She'd survived a corrupt system trying to destroy her credibility. And she'd come out the other side not unscathed, but standing, still working, still saving lives, still refusing to be silenced. That was the real victory. Not the guilty verdicts or the prison sentences or the headlines. The victory was Emily Shaw getting to be a nurse again without fear, getting to walk into work and focus on patients instead of survival, getting to mentor young healthcare workers and tell them that speaking up was possible and necessary and worth it. The victory was reclaiming her life. 6 months later, on a quiet Tuesday morning, Emily stood at a trauma bed preparing for an incoming ambulance. Motor vehicle accident, multiple casualties, high-speed collision on the interstate. The familiar adrenaline kicked in. She checked supplies, briefed her team, ran through protocols in her head. This was what she was good at. This was why she'd become a medic in the first place, to be the person who stayed calm when everything went wrong. The ambulance doors burst open, paramedics wheeling in a patient. Emily took over, assessing injuries, calling for equipment, coordinating with doctors. The chaos was controlled, professional. Everyone working together without ego or hierarchy, just medicine. 90 minutes later, the patient was stable and heading to surgery. Emily stepped outside for air, her scrubs splattered with blood, her hands still shaking slightly from adrenaline. A coworker joined her. "Nice work in there. Team effort, Emily said. Still, you make it look easy. Emily laughed. It's not easy. It's just necessary. They stood together in companionable silence, watching the sun rise over North Haven. Morning shift starting, new patients arriving, the endless rhythm of emergency medicine continuing regardless of individual stories or struggles. Emily thought about the woman she'd been 2 years ago. Exhausted, defeated, accepting abuse because she thought she had no other choice. She'd been so focused on surviving that she'd forgotten she deserved better than mere survival. She thought about that night in the trauma bay, Holloway's hand on her arm, the moment when she could have stayed silent and disappeared. The choice that changed everything. She'd made the right choice. It had cost her sleep and safety and any sense of normalcy for months. But it had also given her something back, her dignity, her voice, her belief that speaking truth to power was possible even when the odds seemed impossible. She finished her shift at 7 p.m. and walked out to the parking lot. No federal agents following her anymore. No reporters waiting with questions. Just normal end-of-shift exhaustion and the satisfaction of knowing she'd helped people. She drove home through downtown, past the coffee shop where she'd become a regular, past the park where she ran most mornings, past the library where she'd started volunteering on weekends. Small pieces of a life she was rebuilding from scratch. Her phone rang as she pulled into her apartment. Unknown number. She almost didn't answer. Unknown numbers had meant threats and harassment for so long.